Hello, I'm Spencer Usden, the Program Director for Headwaters Science Institute, and I'm really excited to share with you our online lessons that we're doing. I know many of us are stuck at home out of school during this tough time, and Headwaters is here to provide you a really fun science learning experience that'll also give you the opportunity to not just be behind your computer, but to also go outside and do real science on your own, ranging from today's 30-minute science lesson on plants to getting to meet a scientist and ask them questions, to other fun things throughout the week. Today, all you need is a pen and a paper, but on Thursday, we are going to be making a bird feeder out of recycled materials. So check the list to make sure you have all the materials you need for Thursday's lesson. The theme of the first few weeks of Monday's science lessons is going to be around how plants grow and develop. As you may know, March 19th was the first official calendar day of spring, and so many plants are starting to grow and develop. Well, here where I am in Truckee, there's actually feet of snow on the ground. It doesn't feel a lot like spring. Some of the plants and trees are starting to develop and do what they do in the spring. Some of my friends in San Francisco have flowers blooming in their yard. The study of plants and how they develop is often called phenology. Phenology is kind of a tricky word. It starts with a silent P-E-H, but we can break it down a little bit. Phen means showing, so something that we can see with our eyes. And ology means something that you can study. So if we put that together, something we can see and something we can study, it's the study of visible things, so things we could go out and see, particularly around things like flowers or growth on plants that we can see. So how do plants grow and develop in ways that we can see throughout the seasons? On the side here, you can see a picture of a cactus that's blooming. I took this photo about a month ago when I was in the desert. Cactus tend to bloom in the early spring or late winter when there's lots of water available after it's rained, but before it gets too hot in the summer. You can imagine how maybe a different plant living somewhere not in a desert might bloom at a different time. So an important part about phenology is looking at how do plants grow. So how do you think plants grow? Many plants start with a seed, and that seed grows up larger and larger. They grow leaves. That takes time and energy from the plant. And then oftentimes they'll make a flower where they'll reproduce and then create seeds to start the process over again. So what types of plants do you have growing around your house or the neighborhood that you live in? Are any of them in bloom right now? Can you take a look outside a window? So what types of plants do you have growing around your house or neighborhood? Where I live, we don't have too many flowers because there's snow still on the ground, but we have lots of pine trees and some deciduous trees that have lost their leaves over the winter but haven't grown back in the spring. One neat thing about phenology is many different types of plants or trees grow differently than each other each spring. For example, daffodils. There's something we often associate with spring, but because they bloom first in these nice yellow flowers. However, other types of plants tend to grow later in the spring. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do today is to make a list of all the types of plants, trees, flowers, bushes that you have living around your house or school or neighborhood that you could potentially go out and see. How about we take 2 minutes to write down a list on our paper of as many of these as we can. If you don't know the exact name of everything, that's okay. Just give it your own name, like the tree with needles over by the mailbox, or the flowers that grow behind my house. Today, with your pen and paper, we're going to do a big brainstorm. So on your sheet of paper, if you can write out a numbered list of up to 15, we're going to come up with 15 different scientific questions today. And that'll be how we start figuring out the experiment we're going to do. Now, we're going to do something that scientists do all the time. It's ask a scientific question. This can be tricky because it's not something we always get practice in, but we'll help you through it. We can kind of think of it as a brainstorm. There are no bad questions. Our job right now is to come up with as many different questions as we can about plants and how they develop in the spring. So, what we're going to do to start is I'm going to ask you to come up with 3 questions, anything about plants and how they developed. I'll give you 3 minutes to do that, and then we'll come back and take a look at what we found. Awesome job! You now have 3 scientific research questions. So now I'm going to share with you 3 of the questions that I came up with. The first question I have is whether the maple tree or the willow tree in my backyard will grow leaves first. The second question that I have is, does the height of a pine tree affect how soon it develops its pine cones? And the third one that I have is whether a bush in the sun or the same type of bush in a different place in the shade will put out its flowers first. Nice work. We're well on our way to coming up with a great scientific question. The next thing we're going to challenge you to do is to ask questions with different question starters. So on your page, if you can write when, what, where, why, and how, and come up with 5 different questions that use each one of those question starters once. This will help us ask all sorts of different types of questions. So we're not just asking, when do the flowers bloom? I'll give you 4 minutes to come up with those 5 questions, and then we'll check back in and do something else. Nice work. We now have the first 3 questions that we came up with, plus the 5 that we did before, for 8 scientific questions already. You're doing awesome. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to come up with 3 more questions, but these questions, I want you to try and compare things. So how does maybe one type of plant compare to another type of plant? Or maybe how does one area compare to another area? How might the plants where you are be different from the plants somewhere else in the world? Let's take 3 minutes to complete these comparison questions, and we'll check back when we're done. All right, nice work. That's 11 questions down. Maybe you have even more. The great thing about asking scientific questions is we can ask as many questions as we want, and the more the better. So the last question challenge that I have for you today is to take some of the questions that we've came up with so far and ask more about the plants specifically in your neighborhood or backyard. So take the list of plants that you've already come up with that live near you and ask 4 more questions about those on your piece of paper. Awesome job! You've come up with a great list of scientific questions today, and this is hard. This takes creative thinking, and is something that scientists all over the world have to put serious thought into. So, for our homework tonight, our job is to come up with even more scientific questions. You can ask your friends, your family members or siblings to help you come up with more questions, or you can step outside and look at some of the plants and see what questions you have about those. Doing all of these questions is going to help us figure out something that we want to study, because next week we're going to take one of the questions that you've come up with and help you turn that into an experiment that you could do yourself to figure out the answer to. You're going to get to be the scientist here and answer the questions that you come up with. Here, let me show you some of the neat things that I found in my yard. So first thing first, we have a very young pine cone. If you can take a look at it, it's really, really small and hasn't really unfurled. Here, we can see a different type of pine cone, but this one right here, it's already starting to grow up and is a little bit older. I wonder why there's a difference between these two. Another neat thing we can see right here is a couple buds on this plant. You can often see them in the spring, and sometimes they're called pussy willows because they're really fuzzy right near the tip. However, a plant just on the other side of my driveway right here didn't have the same growth buds at all. Why is that? Lastly, I've got a piece of a pine tree right here. And if you look right in the middle of all of these, you can see right here a little part where it's starting to grow and might eventually turn into a pine cone. So now that we know a little bit about phenology, our job is to come up with a bunch of different scientific questions so that next week we can turn them into a scientific experiment. You are going to be the scientist here. You're going to ask your own question, design an experiment, and try and figure out the answer to your question, just like real scientists that you might meet tomorrow. Thank you everyone for watching today. I hope you had a great time doing science with us and that you can join us again this week. Tomorrow we have a really cool lesson with a scientist, Daniel Dudick, joining us, who studies frogs and how they're related to each other. And on Wednesday, we're going to have office hours for anyone to ask us science questions about these lessons or their homework. I know now is a tough time for all of us being out of school and having to do all of our learning from home. That's why Headwaters has made all of these lessons free and available for anyone to use. We think that giving people equal access to a great education is a really important thing for everyone. We do know that these videos take resources to make, so we ask that if you do have the ability to contribute $5 or $10 a month to help make these videos possible, that would help us in going a long way to do that.